You are listening to Aim Higher, a Catholic podcast designed to instruct and to encourage the daily practice of our faith. Pax et Bonum. Oh, all right. Let's do it the other way because I just did Pax et Bonum, and I'm just like, well, how did I finish that? So we'll start here. Okay. Pax et Bonum, peace and good to you all. This is Aim Higher. I'm Father Anthony, and with me is Sister Catherine. And today's episode, we're going to talk about Gregorian Chant. Now, Sister, you have to remind me, was this something that some of our listeners asked about?
Well, at least one.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Asked a little bit about
Want to know a little bit more about it.
about Gregorian Chant. Okay. Well,
And you're my second best option to talk about it, so.
yeah, the first best option. Well, he would have enjoyed it. But he's a little busy right now.
Yeah.
But no, yeah. Well, it's just you can go into Gregorian Chant. We can look at it from three different ways: historically, musically, and liturgically. And in preparing for this episode, I looked at various different things, and even went on to the good old internet
Oh,
on
the internet.
YouTube, on the internets. Yeah, the internet. It's on computers now. Looking at what they had to say about it, reading the Catholic Encyclopedia, what it has to say about it, and just going into those three areas that I spoke of. Historically, this is the interesting thing about the chant, is that you have like I've read in my Catholic Encyclopedia, which is the 1917 edition, going to what you hear a lot of more modern historians and musicians speak of it. It's a little bit different information. So it's like, which is true. It's not horribly, it doesn't, I should say, it doesn't affect what Gregorian Chant is, just how it originated and how it really got its name, Gregorian Chant. That's really the issue they bring up. If you look at just the history of it, and I took from one, it's from I'll put it out there as a YouTube channel, Understanding Music. So this taking it from the musical aspect of it, but the man does his work. He also goes into the history. What is Gregorian Chant? And based on what he said, it began to be used in Europe, in the Catholic Church, or we call it the West, at the 8th century. And he even gave a little bit of a history of Pepin the Short, which is he was the father of Charlemagne, and Pope Stephen came to him. It was during the Lombard invasion. That would have been in the 8th century, and seeking his aid with these barbarian invasions. And Pepin came in, and he helped, and he was then declared king of the Franks. And not too long after that, with now the new association with the Roman Pontiff, began his desire, along with that of his son Charlemagne, that they sought the people would use the style of playing chant that's in the Roman Church instead of the Gallican style. I think I'm pronouncing that right. So when you think of what Gregorian chant is, so that's like they say that's like the origin of it. And actually, it was what we see is the blending of the Roman style of playing chant to the Gallican style of playing chant, and which that one actually was a little bit more, as they said, um, a little more ornamented and dramatic style. So basically, you talk about Gregorian, it's plain chant in itself. Plain chant does not, well, some characteristics is that it does not have a metered rhythm. You know, it's like if you know anything about music, it's like it's like go to a it's a 2 count, it's a 4 count, it's an 8 count, however they figure. One, a whole note is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't have that in plain chant. There's certain modulations, the changing from one note to another, which goes a bit into the history and the influence that Gregorian chant has had in Western civilization, Western music. Now, so plain chant, how long it's been in use, it's hard to say exactly, at least in the beginning of Christianity or how it was used. I mean, there's been styles of music used, like in the Old Testament, used in the Mosaic Law, even had King David with the Psalms. What you would think plain chant being very much um, well, when I think of it, I think very much of like the rectal tono, no, Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, and very little modulation, meaning that changing. Like if I went to Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, just you can see, just changing here and heaven here. Here again, I'm not a musician, so I'm explaining it the way that I can explain it, how I understand it. So this was the style of plain chant. Plain chant is like it covers all the different styles, I should say. Gregorian is one of them. Now, this is where you get like the history. I gave you what they spoke of the history, being that it began in like the 8th century. Um, and they addressed that the legend says that a dove sang to St. Gregory, and he had inscribed what the dove spoke to him, and that was the chant. Now, that's a bit of a legend.
Mhm.
Um, it could have happened. That's interesting about legends. It doesn't mean that they're not true. God could have used a dove to speak this ethereal, excuse me, ethereal, like Lord of the Rings, mithril, ethereal tone. Uh, I if you go to, like I said, the Catholic Encyclopedia, and they talk about it, they give the testimony that uh, Saint Gregory the Great. Well, okay, let me just read what the Catholic Encyclopedia says here. Now, note for the fact that Saint Gregory the Great, he was around at the 6th and 7th century, so he reigned from 590 to 604. So the name Gregorian chant points to Gregory the Great, to whom a pretty constant tradition ascribes a certain final arrangement of the Roman chant. So there was a chant that was used prior to the time of St. Gregory the Great. And I think they say the first 3 centuries, it was not sure what the church used, but over the time you had the Ambrosian style, you had the Ah, there was the other style of playing chant. I forget what it was called. Uh, I know I will not do it justice. Well, we'll just go look at here. This will be fun. M- Mazarobic. Oh, I know I'm going to say it wrong. I should have written it down, so I didn't have to go waste our time going through all this. But let's just There we go. There we go. Yeah, we know of the Gregorian style of chant and the oh, I didn't have that one written down, but it was a different. So you have different styles of plain chant that were used, and the Roman style, which became Gregorian, is the one that is became predominant, and it's the idea that there is one style of chant for the one church, and here it is, Maz uh, Mozarabic chants. I just didn't look at. Yeah, I just didn't look at it close enough. So
It's just funny because I remember seeing in a lot of our books require the reference to Ambrosian chant, and I never really thought beyond, like, that that there could be other styles, and I'm like, "Did we
mhm.
sing other styles?"
You know, I know when we were in the choir, um, um, the, when we were in the choir, I think, we did at least one Ambrosian, I think it was a Gloria, and, I guess the way that this getting away from Gregorian chant, but, Gregorian chant has a certain flow to it. What I mentioned about the modulation, and it can happen at various points within the text, within the music itself. Ambrosian, to my memory and singing it, there seems to be very little modulation, very little change or inflection for most of the text until the end. So, to what I remember, like using like Gloria Patri as an example, would be like, Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, something like that. I mean, it's just like a whole bunch, it's just a lot of flourishes right at the end of it. It's beautiful when it's
Mhm,
done well and someone's
mhm,
prepared to do it. And I remember that, Dad would put that in there a few times, and I always liked it.
mhm.
Let's go back a little bit to this history of that. Uh, Going back to the constant tradition ascribes a certain final arrangement of the Roman chant. It was by Gregory the Great. It is first met with the writings of William of Hirschau, th- uh, though Leo the Fourth already speaks of the Cantus Sangagori. The tradition mentioned was questioned first by Pierre uh, Gassonville, okay, Gassonville, I guess, in 1675 and again in 1729, and by George Baron de Eckart, neither of whom attracted much attention. In modern times, Javaret, president of the Brussels Music School, he tried to show with a great amount of learning that uh, compilation of the mass music belongs to the end of the 7th and the beginning of the 8th century. His arguments led to a close investigation of the question, and at present, practically all authorities, including, besides the Benedictines, such men as Wagner, Augustin, and Frere, hold that the large majority of plain chant melodies were composed before the year 600. The principal proofs for a Gregorian tradition may be summarized thus. The testimony of John the Deacon, Gregory's biographer, in, in the year 872 is quite trustworthy. Uh, you also have feasts known that have been introduced after Gregory the Great, use the main melodies borrowed from older feasts. Um, the texts of the chants are taken from the Itala version, which as early as the first half of the 7th century, St. Jerome's correction had been generally adopted and frequent occurrence in the plain chant melodies of cadence moduled in the literary courses shows that they were composed before the middle of the 7th century when the curses went out of use. So it's just kind of a debate whether or not this happened, that the chant style of chant was used prior to the time of Saint Gregory the Great, and that he was the one that kind of finalized it and brought it to the form that we know now and promoted it, or whether or not it appeared like 100 years later, and some ascribe that it would have been Gregory the second, I believe was the second that they or Gregory the fourth, actually I can't remember, that they were saying that might have had a deeper influence upon it. Uh, just it's I don't expect people to follow that too much because it's just so much to it. Um, it's just whether whether it came from the hand of Saint Gregory the Great, or he's the one that brought it all together, or what, or God spoke to him divinely to inspire this, or it's just they used the name of Gregory the Great to add a certain amount of legitimacy to it. Because that's one of the things that this gentleman brought up in his video, that there was a bit of controversy when they brought the two styles together, the Roman and the Gallican style. So to add legitimacy, they attached the name of Saint Gregory to it.
Name dropping, okay.
Yeah, name dropping. But, put all that aside, does it really matter exactly how it came? We know plain chant was used centuries prior to St. Gregory and used in the West, and it developed over the years into the various styles: Ambrosian, Gallican, and the other one that I know I can't say without actually looking at it, even when I look at it, the Mozarabic style. I guess it just in the end, I'm just saying it just doesn't really matter how we got
Mhm.
it, how it developed, or whether Saint Gregory had that, personal attachment to it. I think it's in a way, it honors, um, Pope Saint Gregory the Great, because he really was, um, like, the architect of what we know, uh, Rome to be. Uh, the it was, you know getting the help of, the Franks against the Lombards, establishing the Papal States. Uh, he was a truly, an innovator, and is known for his love for the chant, for the liturgy. So I'd say you could go back and say, "Well, anyway, we honor him for this,
We give 'em credit.
and we have given, and it's we have adopted, uh, oof, we've adopted his name, and we're using it to describing this style, the Gregorian style of chant." So again, plain chant, very simple. And what one some people don't know, or we might not think about it, it's like Gregorian chant is the stepping stone of Western music as we know it. Music would not have evolved if it was not for Gregorian chant. Like, no classical music. You've heard people say, I know, sister, you've heard this too. Um, you know, you have things like rock and roll and country music. Um, they have their origins, I mean, really in classical music in so many ways. They're inspirations.
Mhm.
And nowadays we live in a time of film and cinema, and composers writing these pieces for movies. There is a certain amount of influence that from the Gregorian chant. Oh, first off, Gregorian chant was brought about the first widely used system of music notation in the West. So I talk about the modulation. I know when you see the notes going up down the scale. They're the first ones to you know, put that to sheet music. Before that, it was all oral tradition.
Hmm.
So unless you actually met the author who who created this, who did had it by memory, you wouldn't have known how this would have sounded. I was watching I think it was that same video maybe, I can't remember. But oh no, it was another one that a man was describing the type of notations that the note not notations as we know it, but notes we would use in the chant. And it was written in such a way that you wouldn't understand it unless you were the one who wrote it or you knew the person who wrote it. And there are like a lot of like markings like over each syllable of what you do.
Well, it's kind
And
of like I'm sorry to interrupt, but just like a painter, there you can recognize if you study the style, you can recognize the artist by
sure.
that without even seeing a name. The bishop had a art history course that he had gotten when girls' school was here,
Mhm.
and it talked about that. Like there's something within the piece that you could recognize the artist to it, and I just thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and with this, at this point, you probably could, say, well, it was Master so and so who put on these markings, but it wasn't a notation system as we know it. But that is what they eventually did and formulated, so that music could be shared, um, not just to people that knew the author, but for centuries following. Um, There are some characteristics of Gregorian chant. I've alluded to a lot of them already, but I'm just going to list them. And there are six that were given. Care One, it is in Latin. That's one thing that stands out. It's in the Latin language, and this is not surprising because when Christianity began, it began in the Roman Empire, and when Christianity was uh, adopted, that would have been about officially about the year 380. That would have been Emperor Theodosius, I think. Theodosius the Great was the one who um, put out the edict making it the religion of the state. I think it was the Edict of Mesopotamia. I think that's what it was.
History is not.
I cannot. No, Edict of. Hmm. No, that's going to. I know. Like Father, it doesn't matter. Of Thessalonica, the Edict of Thessalonica.
It
That's what it
matters to
was.
you,
It
so
does. I want to get the information out. Now this is what I've heard it called. I've gone through some of my usual references. They mentioned the edict he put out, but I didn't know that it was a tribute to the city of Thessalonica. So uh there you go. I guess it is, but uh and then you can consider the fact being part of Rome, this is the language they spoke was Latin, and the roads which the apostles and the other missionaries used were the roads that were built for the empire. So obviously, it made sense to adopt the Latin language because most people spoke that. Well, Latin or Greek were the two languages used, but then you went further north you went, you have the Germanic countries and the and so on and so forth. But Roman Latin is what was used. And it is stuck to this day using Latin. Um, I mentioned before, it does not have metered rhythm, so there's no beats as we know it. And as I mentioned, it gives it that ethereal sound. It's like Jesús angelicator bacelorum, exude divina mysteria, e produt angis regis victoria. Should depict something that I remembered perfectly, but it's the, Exultet, and it just has that flow, and it's not restricted, and it does seem otherworldly, especially when you have a whole choir,
Mhm.
especially when they all come together, um, 'cause it's one of the other features is it is no harmony. Normally not done with accompaniment, and you see sometimes nowadays accompaniment is used, especially for, like, church choirs,
Mhm.
but it's still restricted in how it's used, but in its texture, it's monophonic, one voice, and when you think about it, the religious symbolism with using one voice, it represents the unity of the church itself. I always preferred personally doing chant
Mhm.
than having, the polyphonic, music because it's just I always had a thing with my ear and, keeping, what key, what when I'm actually singing, but all coming at one voice, oh,
Definitely. No, it's
yeah.
I
Excuse
love
me.
singing I do love singing chant,
Mhm,
and I prefer Latin, obviously, really, if anything else sing, I mean, I was looking at it the other day, we have a hymn card here at the chapel, I've got 10 hymns on there,
mhm,
and only one of them is in Latin, but I keep using that one because when you get to English hymns, sometimes everybody has a slight version, but
mhm.
you can't, you can mess up your
What
pronunciation on
hymn
that.
is that? O
Oh,
Santissimo?
Santissima. But I mean, it's almost appropriate, maybe
Mhm,
except for Advent and Lent, but,
mhm,
I just realized, in myself many, many years ago, I never felt comfortable singing anything that would church hymns, but
mhm,
more so Latin, but, when we were, long before our religious vocation and we
right.
go to, like, karaoke parties, and I was always kinda tempted to go up there and sing, but yet I knew while I can sing, I feel like my voice is only for God. And someone could argue, it's like, "Well, you could sing secular songs and still be for God's greater honor and glory." Absolutely. Of course, I will just add that some songs probably don't reflect that very well, but we're not gonna get into that. And I would think maybe that should be your, um, thing that keeps you, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, how about conscientious of the music you listen to? It's like, you know
Mm,
it's like, is this something that, really makes you think about our Lord and our creator, all those things,
mhm.
or is this song just I don't know. I don't know. We know that there are some songs out there that we should not listen to, but, um,
My eyes are for God, my ears are for God, my voice is for God.
yes. And so I don't think I ever really I attempted once to sing a secular song. I don't even think you were there. I think it was at a different event. And I'm like, I think I was singing with somebody. I was like, this is not for me. This is not how I feel comfortable. And I can really only sing songs about God and for God. So that's where I'm comfortable. And that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Well, I for me, I just say that's good. As good as somebody who is the opposite of that. Um, I just for me, karaoke was different, but,
Mhm.
it was also a bit of performing, and you enjoyed that, but you don't perform chant, you don't perform,
That's also true.
uh, what we do at church. It's not a performance, and it was never meant to be a performance, but, those abuses did come in as far as church music in general over the years, and one of the reasons why, Pope St. Pius X had to issue his, motu proprio on, uh, liturgical music because it's become too much of a show.
Yep.
it takes away from the whole point of music in the liturgy.
I mean, there are some very beautiful masses, and I mean, back in the day at Our Lady of the Rosary when we had a choir that had all the parts, all 4 parts, but multiple people singing them, not just, you might have 1 soprano or you might have 1 tenor. We had the people, and the people also came from a
Mhm,
background of singing choir, and there were some really beautiful masses, and to think about how
mhm,
beautiful those were, and to think that there are some that were, I guess, what, blacklisted? There is a term that I remember dad talking about it, that you're
mhm,
prohibited to use because they are too much of a show. It's too performative. I
mhm,
mean, there's a story, maybe it's in a children's book, about, I think it was a choir director, who practiced a piece to sing, and I don't know if it was for mass or even if it's just for a concert, but well, not a concert in church, but something, and did a beautiful job, and later in the day, he's very proud of himself, and later in the evening, the Blessed Mother appeared to him because it was a hymn to the Blessed Mother, I believe, and he was so grateful to see the vision of her and almost kind of attributed his that he received this grace because he did such a wonderful job, but to find out that the Blessed Mother was actually very displeased with him because he was singing for himself and not singing for God and his greater honor and glory. So let that be a lesson. Everything we should do should be for the greater honor and glory of God. And if that is what you actually put for your to keep you going, you really can't go wrong, right?
no, oh, no, you can't go wrong. It's so true. I recall back in the days doing theater and singing and doing stuff publicly. I know we've talked about this on the program here a few times, but for me, um, I got used to the applause and the praise. So, I mean, I remember having this mental debate within myself of singing at church and singing out in the world and putting forth the effort. You put a lot of effort, singing out in the world, put a lot of effort. Okay, wait a minute. I gotta fix this. I didn't put that much effort even in the world. I was not a trained singer, but when I had to, I did. Uh, but you come back to church and the choir, and it was I putting forth everything I could, and I didn't feel like I I I didn't feel like I had that ambition, and the reason why is because the answer, I wasn't doing it for God, and if God is the beginning and the end of why we sing, of why we chant, um, it makes it, so much more it becomes spiritually beneficial for us, and it helps direct our minds and our thoughts to God in holy prayer, and it's one of the other, uh, characteristics of Gregorian chant is that it's designed to invoke a mood of worship and religious reflection. So using any extra affectation, uh, takes away from that. It is supposed to aid, the faithful, not to distract them. And this is one of the reasons why Pius X was encouraging congregational singing, trying to get the congregation to take part in it. Some, actually, I think even going all the way back to Saint Ambrose in like the 4th century, he himself was promoting that in Milan. So it wasn't a new thing, taking part in singing the various parts of the mass, and you really go into a history of Gregorian chant, you go into the history, the development of mass as well.
Mhm.
They're almost side by side and how they develop because you have the chanting for the introit, the gradual, the alleluias, the tract, uh, communion, offertory prayer, post communion, all these things, the antiphons that are used, how they all were developed into what we know today. Um, the monks of Solem, and how they took the chant and they they adapted it and returned it back to its simple form, uh, which is, I believe, Pius X referenced their work quite a bit, and making sure that God is at the center of it all. And when we talk about the liturgy, God is the center of the liturgy. He is the reason for the liturgy. And remember, what is the liturgy? It is our Catholic faith put into ceremony. That's what it is. As Gregorian chant is our Catholic faith put into song, into this plain chant. And the idea for it to help lift our souls, because even though a lot of modern music has been influenced by Gregorian chant, although I think now that we're talking about centuries, that influence is very little, because certain things of rock and roll, yeah, you can connect it to Gregorian chant, in that without the notations that we were given, you wouldn't have this. But the ends are different. One is just to amuse you. Some would say, well, it lifts my soul. I mean, you hear a beautiful aria being sung. You listen to some beautiful scores, like from John Williams or
Yes.
something.
You
Thinking Jurassic Park right
that
now.
was
It's
what
just
I was thinking
what
too.
most beautiful, pieces of music I've ever heard. Da 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 dun da 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 dun dun da. The Lord of the Rings soundtrack is just, Howard Shore is incredible. Uh, Without Gregorian chant, without the development of music, and going then into the I think I'm using the right term, polyphonic style, the multiple voices. Um, you wouldn't have had that. It all began really with the plain chant
Mhm.
and how it was used. But I'm glad there's still much of a difference, because if they were too similar, we would not be able to really separate the two as we do, one for liturgical usage and one for what we call profane use. Use the word profane, people often always think of a negative thing.
Mhm.
Profane just means not liturgical. It's not used for religious purposes. If it's if it's profane, it's not used in church. That's it. That's all it
Mhm.
means. And I'm glad there's that separation, because you you can't really engage in the spiritual. And I mean, the reason I'm kind of jumping here and there is because I've been taking like quotes from various sources. Uh, One is from an Albert Abbot Ildefonso Hewigen. He wrote a book, Liturgy's Inner Beauty. And he wrote here, the purpose of Christian religion is to bring us as transfigured Christians to the transfigured Christ. The idea of a Christian's transfiguration is the art principle of the liturgy. So think of the liturgy in general. Then we going to the music. Pope Pius XII in Mediator Dei says, such an active sharing of the laity in liturgical worship may be accomplished when, for instance, the whole congregation, in accordance with the rules of liturgy, either answer the priest in an orderly and fitting manner, or sings hymns suitable to different parts of Mass, or do both, or finally at high Masses, where they answer the prayers of the minister Jesus Christ and also sing liturgical chant. That them taking part in your choir, in your parish choir, and we talk about the criteria of this chant is the most important element is the text. It must be found the character, the spirit of the church's public prayer. It should be objective, not subjective, communal, not individualistic. It should convey deep theological teaching in a manner which is both beautiful and inspiring, and expresses not so much the personal emotion of the individual as the universal mode of the praying church. Sacred music is neither a mere entertainment nor simply an ornamentation. For St. Pius X states, its proper aim is to add greater efficacy to the text, in order that through it the faithful may be more easily moved to devotion and better disposed for the reception of the fruits of grace belonging to the celebration of the holy mysteries. So the text, what we're singing about, and it takes me. Did you? I don't know if you saw this. I don't know if I ever mentioned it to you. I think I've mentioned it, but I never directed you. There's this group. What do they call themselves? Soul of Chant. I don't know what they call themselves, but I don't know who they are. But they're a bunch of guys. I'm going to call them guys who take contemporary music and put it in the style of chant.
That sounds familiar.
And Father Joseph first pointed me to that years ago, and I listened to it. And, it's like taking like sounds of silence. It's like, hello, darkness, my old friend. Come to talk with you again. So I had stuff like that. I mean, does it sound bad? No, but you know what? It's not chant. You're basically just you're trying to form it in this way, and honestly, it's a novelty.
Mhm.
It's all just a novelty to sell some CDs to make some money. That's what it is. I'm sorry, because you take away the text, you take away the prayer, then chant is just sound.
Right. Right. Well, that's exactly it, and I remember when we were in school, and I think I was at high school at this point, and or maybe 8th grade. Yeah, had been 8th grade. Not that that's important, but James was still in school. He was senior year, and he
Mhm.
was starting to get really into music, and he was self-taught, and he collected a bunch of us older kids and started teaching us some of the hymns, like Adoramus Te Christe to sing, and then we started singing that during the offertory. And I just remember one time saying to him, how did it go? I basically had the thought that these are just a bunch of Latin words put together. I didn't put 2 and 2 together that, these are actual prayers until, your older brother, you know, does his role
Yep.
and corrects the younger, aloof sibling, if you will. So and then but then, that stuck with me, and I remember and I don't know if I know dad's redone a lot of the music books, but when I was still there and I had my music book, in some of the hymns, I'd actually put, like, little notes, especially, like, what the translation was
Mhm.
for a certain point, or just made notes of I think for Adoramus Te Christe, I just put in there, "You did this for us," meaning you, our Lord, you did this for us. So to kinda help me focus on what am I singing? Well, I'm actually praying, and praying is singing twice, or no, singing is praying twice. I got opposite brain today. I don't this is what makes me interesting, I guess. Um, and because sometimes you just need that little help to think
Mhm.
about what you are praying, and I know some people might make the argument, "Well, why is everything still Latin? You don't know what's being said." Well, you can find out.
You
Okay,
can find
if your missal has English Latin and English right there, so and you can do that with hymns. You absolutely can do that with hymns. If you need help with that, a little research will go a long way, but, if
well,
you wanna
especially if you're looking at, like, the Gloria, the Credo for Mass at a time where the faithful are usually sitting down and listening, you can if you have your English and you have your Latin side by side, it's not a huge leap to figure out where you're at as you're singing and following with the English
Well,
and listening. I mean, the more you're exposed to Latin, the easier it is, but it's not too hard, and yet it's basically if you wanna put the effort to it.
yes. Well, and I always found it interesting during those times, especially the Gloria and the Credo, is observing the priest, especially during the Credo, because there's a part when we talk about the incarnation, the laity
Mhm,
servers get up and kneel, and the priest bows, and how beautiful that is. 'Cause, you genuflect as the priest is saying the Credo, but when
mhm,
it moves and I know not everybody is exposed to a sung mass on the regular basis,
mhm.
but that is something just so beautiful and moving, and then there's another part in the Credo where the priest bows is at the trying to think what part it is. It's been a long time since I've been at a sung mass, so but just, those motions, that's why I do try to encourage children to kind of watch what's going on. Yes, it's important,
Mhm.
read in your missal and follow along, but also pay attention to the motions of the priest um, and just how that's all worked out, and as you pointed out that this was all the development of the liturgy and for our benefit, and it's not boring. It's not boring if you really want to learn. It
It's
if
there to help you lift your soul. Your music has that effect. It has an effect upon us, whether we on a for you think if you're just from a physical and psychological point of view, it has an effect upon us. And, there's people that say that listening to classical music regular basis can increase your brain power, can help you focus, and I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I mean, basically, I can't, like, base that scientifically, but I have seen positive effect of listening to that type of music.
well, it reminds me of, um, there's a family in Wisconsin, and when their oldest daughter, who's now in the choir, by the way, and she listens to this podcast. When she was little, they used to play a chant CD at
Mhm,
night for her to go to sleep, and it would calm her down, and it was very effective,
mhm.
and it's just so true. It can help you focus. It's great for meditation. And I think if you're struggling with contemplation and meditation, maybe just find a nice hymn and just listen to it. And then maybe,
Mhm.
whatever the hymn is, find out what, if it's in Latin, find out what it is in English, write it down and just embrace that. And I plan to, when I put this episode together, I'll put some notes about put in direction to some Gregorian chant hymns
Mhm.
that we like, where you can find them, because I know not everybody's like, "Well, where do I start? What's appropriate?" Um,
No, I mean, to answer that question, and anyone wants to get introduced to chant, going to what referred to as the soul of chant is what's contained in the mass, the propers of the mass. So you have like the what's that, 4 or 5? I'm not counting right. Uh, main masses, yeah, 4 that are sung throughout the year. They're even in Gregorian chant, they are different masses, but the ones that we mostly hear would be, well, Mass of the Angels, then you have Orbis Factor, you have Cum Jubilo, and then you have, uh, Luxor Origo. And coming in at number 5, I don't know really the name of it, but it's used, the Advent and Lent masses.
yeah, that's always what I known them to be.
And as I don't know if there's actually another name for it. Be interesting to go find that out. That's always what it's been called. So if you wanted to engage in that and begin somewhere, that is, a way to start. But um, sometimes looking for a hymn and, um, probably, well, you have, oh boy. There's a Pange Lingua.
Pange Lingua?
Pange Lingua gloriosi, corporis mysterium. But you have O Salutaris, you have Tantum Ergo, used for benediction.
Mhm.
Uh, so those ones you can hear on a regular basis, relatively
There's
speaking.
also the 4 antiphons for the Blessed Mother,
Yeah, the 4
um,
hymns.
and I don't know if any of our listeners are aware that Bishop Madrigal has a YouTube channel, and he recently uploaded some ceremony, and they're in the church, and they are singing Ave Maria, the chant version, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are aware that there are different versions of Ave Maria and some that, are very, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Complicated. I mean, they're very beautiful,
Yeah,
but not easy to sing.
yeah.
And then you have this is probably one of the most beautiful, I think, because of its simplicity. There is another, and I can't think of what it's called, a version of Ave Maria that we would sing in Wisconsin. I'm sure they still do. But
Mhm,
it when you compare them to, and there's nothing wrong with either. If you like the, bigger, more flourishing, nothing
mhm,
wrong with that, but there is just something so beautiful about that simplicity. And, I mean, I like Ave Verum Corpus,
mhm.
and there are fancier versions of that too, but when you just
Yep.
go back to it, the Gregorian chant is so simple.
Just
It's easy to learn,
yep.
um, and what's I remember that one specifically, our brother James telling me that picking that one on the regular is good because it when you think about what the translation is, it makes references to our Lord and the Blessed Mother, so it's almost appropriate at any time,
Mhm,
barring, certain obvious things, I guess. But, I mean, we don't do a whole lot of singing here
mhm.
in Rochester. I am a little bit more motivated to really put a lot more effort into our recessional based on a recent sermon the bishop gave about the mass and how even just because I get, sometimes our mentality is like, okay, let's, mass is over, ite messias, let's go, is not the attitude we're supposed to have. And I'll link that sermon too for our listeners if they haven't
There you
heard it
go.
already, because that will really change. If you have kind of feeling about the mass that you're trying to overcome, this sermon will give you what you need to do that. So,
Mhm,
'cause I know sometimes we think, well, when we do all these things, it just makes it longer. Well, when you think about what the mass is, why wouldn't you wanna be there for it all? Because and what is it for? God's greater honor and glory, giving him
mhm,
what he deserves, and there's ways to be a part of it.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Uh, I just think of, many of my favorite hymns and, you know, I guess to give just a few more, you have Jesu Dulcis Memoria. It's my favorite Latin hymn, of all time. It's
Mhm.
just it's the one I like very much. It's just, Jesu dulcis memoria, vere cordis caria, sed super melatonia, Jesu dulcis presentia. And when you bring many voices together, oh, it is my favorite, and, Puer Natus in Bethlehem is my favorite Christmas
That's a nice
hymn. I mean, you wanna go Latin and English, it's my favorite. Oh, puer natus in Bethlehem, alleluia. Unde gaude Jerusalem, alleluia, alleluia. In cordis jubilo, Christum natum adoremus, cum novo cantico. Just it always has a special place in my heart, but you can't mention chant without bringing up two hymns that are used often, especially in religious orders of various ceremonies, the Veni Creator
Mhm.
and the Te Deum. And just you just so it's so beautiful. Like take the Te Deum. Basically, in essence, it's the song, Holy God, we praise thy name. So the same sentiment, the same intention behind that hymn is the same with the Te Deum. It's thanking God, it is adoring God, it is making reparation, it's petition. It's all ends a prayer in one beautiful hymn. And oh, and I just remember out, I remember when we all came out for your it would have been your simple vows.
Okay. And
And
before you
we
were
did.
going for ordained, that was
Yeah, it was the year I was ordained. Yeah, I was still a brother, and we flew out for that. And you know, myself, James, and Dad, we sang the Te Deum. And
it
no,
wasn't
I wish we had
because
a
you
recording of it. It
it
was
wasn't because you all were grateful that I was now someone else's problem and not yours.
officially.
Hey, there was still a 3-year window where that could
No,
have,
yeah,
no.
but
I remember that, that was
but it was such an experience. And well, I just remember when we were rehearsing it, and I was intoning, and I just remember going, Te Deum laudamus. James just stared at me. He's like, "What are you doing?" Like, "What?" He says, you can't start that high. You gotta start lower. I can't start
Mhm,
there."
mhm,
Of course, just my inexperience and just well, don't just start singing where you can. No, you're intoning, you're showing, where you end at that point, that's where they begin.
mhm.
So I was like, "Oh, okay,"
The more you
So,
know.
well, the more you know. And I was very fortunate to have James help me prepare for the Exultet.
Mhm.
For me, that's I guess, when I say Jesu Dulcis Memoriae is my favorite hymn, Catholic hymn. I guess if you were to include the Exultet, which is used in the liturgy for Holy Saturday, that probably is my favorite. It's my favorite to
Mhm,
do. So
mhm.
I look forward to that every year.
Oh, absolutely.
Um, we'll let this be live. We're probably gonna have to wrap this up because
Yes.
we've got people coming in, putting in a new water heater
Yep.
in out of the basement, and I just heard the banging.
So it's not gonna get
So
better probably.
I think that's like the Angelus bell being rung. It's time to end. And it's well, they just started, so it's gonna be a lot of work. So
Right. And and like I said, I'll put links to some, um, material because I think introducing children to the chant, even the Mass of the Angels, it's so beautiful. We learned it as kids. There's a lot of children around. It's easy to do.
Mhm.
I'm still very grateful dad lowered the key over the years.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
also just my probably a simple one is the Salve Regina. It's a
There you
pretty
go.
and I was just thinking I'm gonna type that up and we're gonna sing that because we have 2 Marian feasts coming up on a Sunday,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
it's something to be excited about, so
Yeah.
get into the
Yeah.
music.
Yeah. Get into the music. Get into the praise and glory of God. And if He is the end, He's the beginning and the end, why you chant, why you sing, then it is spiritually meritorious for you. And if it helps lift your mind and your heart to Him, well, think of it this way. When we sing, we imitate the angels before the throne of God. And the angels who have God in their mind, who are in His presence all the time. We too want to be in the presence of God. So when we take part together in the liturgy, let's not be afraid, to take part in this song for his greater honor and glory. Deo gratias.
Deo gratias.
Deo gratias.
I was hoping for that, Father.
Oh, thank you.